It's so beautiful to be here with you today and to take a little time out of my administrative and teaching day to just be in this space with you. I am a little shorter than our previous speaker. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Stuart, for having me. So I was eavesdropping a little bit, which I'm sure as a rabbi you do professionally, just listening to how do you do this very delicate dance, even the dance of cognitive dissonance as we're speaking and thinking, holding our own thoughts, our own anger, our own grief. As we know, sometimes, at least what we've seen this past year, is that people who have no control to change a situation, instead of grieving, they become angry. And then they choose targets, and sometimes they're the easy targets. And I want to invite everyone to sort of step away from that kind of conversation and think about alternative modalities of textual learning as a container and Marty Linsky and Ron Hafetz talk about it a lot in leadership. When you have sort of some controversial issue, how do you create a safer container? So that might be, we're going to study a sonnet of Shakespeare, and we're going to sort of analyze it and then bring ourselves to the text and see, sort of take the road less traveled, the side road, and see where that gets us. So that's what I would like to do with you this morning. I'm also going to, in the spirit of the vacation and luxury that is close reading, invite you to get off at least one device. If not, close your laptop. If you want to take some notes, you have a piece of paper. I do this with my undergraduate students, just to invite you to be fully present. I know it's hard. I know it's hard. Stuart, do I need to stand here? Oh, man. You'll only be in the frame for I can move right here. I can move here through the end of that. Okay, but it has to be not in front of the podium. Correct. Okay. Sorry. But apparently this mic's okay, so thank you for allowing me a little bit of movement. So this is a little bit cramping my style and my closeness to you, which is where I would be. So I want to share with you, I've been to Israel 4 times since October 7th, and also been running student activism at Yeshiva University, also on our undergraduate and our graduate level. We have 3 undergraduate schools, and we have currently 9 graduate schools and multiple other graduate programs. And my last trip in August, I was there right after the attack, and there was this ominous sense that Tehran was going to retaliate for the death of Sinwar any minute. It was going to be that Friday night. Anyway, I went to give blood, and they took my blood pressure and said, your blood pressure is way too high. You can't give blood. And I said, this never happened to me before. And I have low blood pressure generally. So he just couldn't get it down. They kept taking my pulse. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go to a bookstore, thinking that was just going to calm me down. Well, here's what happened. I just got more anxious. Oh, why didn't I write about this? Why didn't I think about this? Anyway, I came back. My blood pressure was 15 points higher. In the end, they managed just to take my blood. And I actually, right before Friday night, we're going away for Shabbat, my husband and myself. And that feeling, what if this happens tonight? And the rational part of me sort of, what precautionary measures should we take right now in our safe room? And the visceral part of me was really alerting me to danger. It's like my heart was beating. I said to my husband, who's an ER physician, I feel like someone is squeezing my heart and sitting on my chest. I think that this situation, when we start really thinking about it, particularly after the devastation of this weekend, it does something to our bodies, our souls, our minds, this prolonged, and I think it's very, very important, especially for rabbinic guides and spiritual guides and educators, to actually name the tension and name how we're feeling, the complexity of the feelings, the anxiety of the feelings. I think people, in some way, it gives them permission to articulate their own, and to also understand that this is a situation that for many of us in our lifetime, we've never experienced before. You have a handout, and I want to teach a text that I think is related in some way to anxiety management, and certainly related to many points that I heard many of you bring up. So first, I want to look at the painting. I love teaching through paintings. This is a graphic image. I have tried literally for probably now 4 hours with other helpers to find out who. Oh, I can go. I can go right in front. Oh, I have been free. Okay. Wow. Hello. I'm saying hello. I'm saying hello again. Right in front. Okay. Yeah. There you go. So I want to actually, I don't know who painted this and designed this. I've looked at many artistic depictions of this scene. I happen to love this one. I hope you'll love it too. Tell me what you're seeing. I did have it for you in color. Just yeah, it was just a little cheap on the photocopies. No, it's okay. But the color image I think is very striking, and maybe we'll be able to send it to you. Please, what, Paul? Okay, so right. Am I holding you back? Am I holding you up? Right. So that's the person holding the staff. And what's interesting to me is also the artist made a choice not to show us Moshe's face. We see the face of Aaron, Moshe's brother, on the right. We do not see the face of Hur, Moshe's nephew, on the left. We don't see the Amalekites, and we also don't see all those little dots that are down on the left. Those are people that Joshua Yoshua is gathering for the approaching war, but we don't see their faces either. So the artist has really only given us one face to look at. What else are you noticing? That face is looking upwards, and how would you describe that face? Right. It's excruciating. It is physically exertive. Now, we don't have that sense from Hor on the left. He's a young man. He puts all of his energy. Look at the difference in what they're wearing, right? The sort of tunic it's not exactly a priestly garment, but you have a sense as the Kohen Gadol, as the high priest, that he might be dressed for the part, whereas everyone is dressed for the part. Hor is strong and able-bodied, and you're getting a sense of the cummerbund there, the metal cummerbund that he's wearing as a protective garment, his muscles, the armbands. What about what Moshe is wearing? He's doing his own thing. Yeah, he's got his own fashion. He's got his own style. It's a colored striped tunic that's sort of blowing in the wind. And if you were an artist and thinking, well, what should I put Moshe in? You want to put him in something that attracts the attention of others. It's not a plain tunic. Even maybe there's a little sense of the Ketone Pasim, a striped garment of Joseph, that the artist sort of giving you a leadership. How we're not going to give you an ermine cape, but maybe we will give you a cape that has suggested leadership in the past. Anything else? I think your name is Lisa, right? Yeah. Mm. That he needs Moshe. Beautiful. Mm. You could say he's praying to God, but you could also be yelling at Moses. Don't drop it. You got this. Yeah, don't drop this. Everything is dependent on you. And by the way, I think many of us do feel that in the work that we do. There are moments when we feel everything is dependent on us, and I just want to sit down. So I just signed Paul's book, my Jonah commentary, which I'm very grateful that you brought. And I said, just don't run away, right? In other words, the Jonah model of their moments when you say, I just can't do this anymore. I'm just going into the deepest recesses of myself and withdrawing. And I've spoken to many people. First of all, during COVID, there are many people who felt that. I just don't have It's not a plan. It's not, this is an unprecedented reality. And for those who have been in rabbinic charge from COVID to now, it's like in this very short span of time, we have been thrown what feels like sometimes unsurmountable challenges. Hmm.
I think there's a stark contrast between Kor and Aaron. That Aaron has this, he has the fear and the terror of experience. Right? He knows what could happen. And this young combat soldier, if you will, has all the confidence and it's exactly where we are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And also the mentality that you need to fight is very different than the reality that you have to grapple with to give and inspire your flock, right? Where you're thinking, if I give up hope, everyone gives up hope. And so I think that there's a lot of different suggestions here around the nature of hope. Just a few other things I want to point out, and you're welcome to continue making your observations. Number one, when an artist, sometimes when we analyze a painting, we just put it in quadrants and then see where the light is and also where the center of the painting is. So it's done slightly off center. Core is actually at the center of the painting, which may signal the urgency that in a time of military, that's your primary concern, is making sure that we're actually militarily prepared. And then the staff is slightly above center, and in a certain way, it is the character we will pay most attention to in the story. It is where the artist has chosen to put the light. The light is on the staff. Typically, an image that we associate with war is not a shepherd's crook. It's not a shepherd's crook. It's a sword. And it's interesting to make a choice to say what you're going to hold up to give people inspiration is actually something that's much more simple and nonviolent as an image in war. So the other comment before we actually study the text together is that Moshe is surrounded by different supports. He's got the support of his family, which is very important for someone was actually abandoned as a child. You look, abandonment is a major theme throughout Jewish leadership as it presents itself in Tanakh, some period of time where you are separated from parents or where you do not have parents. I think Harry Potter. You do not have parents, and you're expected to somehow develop self-resilience. So if you look, for example, there's a midrash where David talks about not having parents. We just started reading La David Hashem Ori Yishi, the Psalm 27, the idea that my parents have abandoned me. So there's a midrash that says, David says, how can I lead? My parents have abandoned me. And then God says, well, what about Esther? Right? Esther was an orphan. It gives him examples of ways in which individuals have to find inner resources. And at the same time, when you're actually finally reunited with your family, what a source of strength that is. So here you have him surrounded by family and then the staff on top. What's the relationship that Moshe has with his staff? And I always say you can't be a good leader without a good staff. I actually own an actual shepherd's crook brought to me by one of my Wexner classes. Was not TSA approved, so I could not take it with me and it had to be shipped. But what is the staff for Moshe? Source of miracles, otot and moftim. And problems, please say more. Oh, you hit right. It's a source. It can be a source of violence. It can be a source of miracles. If you recall, when Moshe lacked confidence, God said, "Throw the staff down, pick it up." Right. He also, he said to him, "It's an image. You have the power in your own hands. You may feel that the inner critic is working overtime. But I want to show you just how much influence you have in your own hand. You can throw it down and it can become a snake. This self doubt can actually rot you alive. It can be this scariest demon monster that you'll have to confront. but you pick it up again. You take hold of what scares you and you make it your own. You make it the staff by which you show other people how to lead. You put it across the waters and the waters split. That's your hand. It's an extension of your hand.
And beside all of that, it's also a symbol of leadership, of Moses' leadership. So even if he holds it up and it's not doing anything, it can still have a very big emotional
power. In fact, I was once teaching a different text that involved Moshe and the staff, and someone said to me, I get it. I'm an introvert. And Moshe seems to me like an introvert. He said, if you put the visual attention on the staff, you take the attention away from the person and say, this is not about personality. This is about mission, and this is our joint mission together. So I want to actually just suggest, I'm a big prop person when I speak. If I could have brought my TSA approved staff here, I would have. It would have been looked odd on the streets of New York, but honestly, not the oddest thing you've seen. So actually, you can get your own staff, and you can even get. I have a Purim one, a Pesach one that you know for Elijah that just comes in 3 parts of plastic. I want actually you to think about what it would look like to talk about the fact that for us in this war, if we win a military battle and our country falls apart, our people fall apart because of politics, because of protests, because of the justifiable anger that's raging, we will have lost this war on every account. And the idea that for us, the symbol of war is actually the unifying symbol of what a shepherd uses a staff for, to bring people together, to make sure that the stragglers, aren't losing their way, the predators don't harm. As you think about what the model of shepherding, I always say it's the MBA of Jewish leadership is the shepherd, right? You want to be a shepherd. In fact, I don't know if any of you have visited No Kadumim, the Biblical Gardens of Israel. It's one of my really, as a teacher of Hebrew Bible, it's one of my favorite spaces. And they have a leadership program there. And one of the things that they do, I've done part of their leadership program, but not this exercise, is they take a sheep and you have to get the sheep to go from one side of the field to the other side of the field. Everyone says it's really, really impossible. I have never met one person who has done this successfully. And then in my class, someone said, I have done it successfully. I said, I have never met someone who did this exercise successfully. Please tell me your secret. The next time I'm there, I'll use it. And he said, I was so frustrated at a certain point, I just picked up the sheep and I carried it to the other side. So thinking about this image of the shepherd, of the staff, of what a shepherd does as a leader is very different than what a military leader does. But that is our model of leadership. And almost every leader worth his or her salt in Tanakh has been a shepherd for a short period of time. Moshe was a shepherd for 1 verse. Right? We only have 1 verse that indicates that he was a shepherd. That was an express executive degree. Now what I'd like to do, and what's beneath him, which we'll encounter in the text, is a stone. Now, stones are fascinating. Robert Alter talks about stones in the life of Jacob as the hard and unyielding, representing the hard and unyielding nature of the challenges that Jacob faced in his lifetime. So thinking about Moshe, you've got this almost box here, the box of the spiritual leader, the military leader, the staff, and the stone, the 2 inanimate objects, boxed by the 2 human beings, and what they all represent when you need to hold people up in crisis. They need their family. They need spiritual guides. They need physical help. They need to know who's my rock, and they need to know what direction I'm going. So it's really such a gorgeous image. Again, if you're giving a sermon, feel free to use this piece of art or another to talk about what holds you up in crisis, and making sure that you understand it's a surround sound. It's how do we protect ourselves from above, below, on our sides? Everywhere there's seepage and leakage. And how do we help people? We can become, as spiritual leaders, hopefully for people see us that way, we can help in certain ways, and in certain ways we can't. What I'd like you to do is, as a table, if you don't mind reading in Hebrew or English, a few of just reading this text. It's not a lot of verses. and maybe writing on the margins thoughts that you have, things that you didn't notice before, words that you didn't notice before, maybe circle them. Is that okay? Can we do that for a few minutes? Yeah. Okay, so if you're on Zoom, you should have this handout. Please feel free to read it, study it, circle what what you find difficult or mysterious, and we'll give you about 5 minutes. I'll time those minutes. Nice and loud, the study hall, please. All right, we're going to bring our conversation center, if that's all right with you. I know many of you. I don't know all of you. I would like to know all of you. So please don't hesitate to say your name and where you are in life. So let's look at this text from Shemot Yud Zayin. What do you notice in the very first verse? Vayavo Amalek v'yilachem im Yisrael b'refidim. The refidim. I told you we're going to do slow, close reading.
Amalek starts it.
Amalek starts it. Not only do they start it, it says Vayavo Amalek. It's like they just can't, there's nothing in chapter 16 that gives you any indication. There's some sense of the shock of being ambushed in this way. This was a text that I immediately thought of after October 7th, in that first 24-hour period where we really didn't know what was happening. Someone came into shul. I was in the middle of saying Hallel, a woman I know, and she starts pointing madly during Hallel at the word Yisrael, Yisrael, Yisrael to me. And I had no idea what she's saying. She has a son who's serving in the IDF, and she said, "There's a war in Israel." And I was thinking, no. And then all of a sudden, the priest in our neighborhood actually came to talk to our rabbi. And at that time, we thought there were 30 hostages, which was unbearable and unbelievable. And some number of people have died. And I remember thinking about this, vayavo Amalek. Hebrew verbs are very, very powerful. The Hebrew language is very economic. So this idea of being saved in chapter 15, right? The salvation of the water. And then one chapter later, being hit by this tsunami of violence. And it tells us something about the vigilance, unfortunately, that we always require to live in this world. I've been writing a diary around faith since October 7th. Hopefully it'll come out soon. It's called The Morning After, Faith After October 7th. And I was thinking about all the things that we reach for when we hear news like this, because we're also responsible for hundreds, if not thousands, of other people who may be looking to you, to us. What guidance can you give us in this moment? And then you say to yourself, I don't have anything. I don't have any way of thinking about this. And the whatever platitudes I may have used all feel cheap and hollow right now. They're not working. And then you think to yourself about, I was thinking to myself about a conversation I had with my grandparents, Aleichem Shalom, who were Auschwitz survivors. My mother was also a survivor, child survivor, and they all reunited, which is in itself a just miraculous story within a year. And I think of saying to my grandparents as a teenager, Bobby, Zadie, there's no anti-Semitism anymore. We did that. We reached the lowest level of hell. We're not going back there again. And how I would apologize to my grandparents if I had them in the room right now. I wasn't vigilant enough. I didn't read the signs because I didn't want to see the signs. Now, of course, things rise and they fall. But I also want to just ask you to think about, I'm not going to discuss this, but to think about how often we have become critical of Israel, because the people we really need to speak to, we feel really angry at, are people who, as Lisa said before, aren't listening. They're just not paying any attention. And so what happens is that this internal friction that just deepens and deepens because the anger has to go somewhere. And when you think about the Independence War, you think about signing the Balfour, the Declaration, and then immediately having an outbreak. Vayavo, right? It is there. It is present. What is our constant vigilance, and what is the cost and energy of constant vigilance?
It's singular. So I think of chapter 12 of Genesis. I will bless those who bless me, is plural. I will curse him who curses me.
Oh, beautiful.
Theologically, this is not just any enemy.
Right.
This is God's enemy.
Yeah. This is the enemy. This is the forever enemy. Forever enemy. Adi, we've learned together before. Okay, so Moshe, Vayomer Moshe El Yoshua. Now, in Rifidim, the Midrash says Rafa Yadayim. Why is Rifidim? Rifidim is actually a place name, but of course the rabbis loved place names because they were thinking, well, what can I interpret based on what happened here? And they said Rafa Yadayim. We were weak-handed. And therefore we need strength. Because what happens when the vigilance is down, when we don't pay attention to stories of doom, how much anger there is at the army, at military officials, at politicians who were in positions of authority, didn't do something, didn't heed the warnings, how many warnings come in. So there's this sense of the weak-handedness. And it says, V'yelachem im Yisrael, but of course, without Nekudot, we think Am Yisrael, right? Vayomer Moshe el Yoshua, Bachar lanu anashim, v'tzei hilachem b'Amalek, Machar anochi nitzav al rosh hagiva umatei Elohim biadi. Moshe says, okay, here's the division of labor. Joshua, you're a young man. You choose apt and able-bodied people, and go and fight this war against Amalek. But Moshe understands that in every war, there are many wars. If you haven't read a beautiful piece by Bret Stephens, painful piece, about the fact that Israel is actually fighting 5 wars, not 1 war. Moshe understood that there's an ideological, spiritual side of war that has to be fought alongside, and it has to be visible to people. They have to understand that you can't win and you can't fight with ammunition, with spears, swords. You can't do that. Make that fight alone. You have to also fight the spiritual fight. And then Moshe goes and stands on a givah with the staff of God in his hand. Now, of course, when people see that staff, they think you took out the staff 2 chapters ago. You put it across the water, and the water opened. Maybe there's some hope for us. And I want to ask a different question, and that is the givah. Moshe is a mountain man. What mountains were important in his life? Sinai, Nevo, right? And Devarim Lamed Dalet in the 34th chapter, the mountain where Moses will see with a beautiful aerial view just what he has accomplished, where he took people to, the brink of where he took people to. And then Har Chorev, which is where he gets the initial revelation at Sinai, the revelation at the burning bush, right? Vasna and Ukal, the bush wasn't consumed. There's this set of mountains that Moshe could actually tell his life story through. Certainly the arc of his leadership. And yet here, it's a givah, it's a hill. What do you make of that? Is his leadership somehow diminished? He wasn't paying attention. He should have been more vigilant at the moment. Other thoughts?
Pretty projected. That's all that was around. There's no mountain around. So, okay, I'll use this hill. I'm thinking back to what you mentioned with leadership with numbers and answers. He's not at the mountain. He doesn't see the bigger picture. Therefore, not aware enough to prevent this from happening. So does he need, that view from the balcony, and the balcony is higher? I'd like to suggest an alternative reading, although these are all interesting readings. Yes, please. I don't know you. I'm sorry. I do.
A lot of the mountains Moses is alone and not seen by folks down below. Here, he's surrounded, as you mentioned in the picture, it's in this box to be seen. And so if he's up on the heart, he can't be seen but on the gavah.
Okay. So that's where I was going. So thank you for getting there quicker than I did. The idea that Moshe has to know in his life, when are you away from view and isolated with God? And when is your job to actually be in the view of the entire kahal, of the entire congregation? If his goal right now is to say, we can only fight this war on 2 fronts, if both fronts are highly visible, you need the person with the sword and you need the person with the staff to be visible, and not only visible right in front of you. Sort of think of it as stadium seating in the reverse, right? In other words, you need Moshe to be highly visible to everyone. If they can't see his staff, then there's no point in having a staff of God with you, right? So let's think about that image of in leadership as well. When are we so removed or distant that we become somewhat insensitive or atonal to what people are actually saying? And I think that's problematic, and we're all at risk of it. When you're a big picture thinker, or you're standing from a podium, you're not actually seeing, right, that dance floor. So the idea, again, that leadership idea of moving from the dance floor to the balcony and then back up again, up and down, that oscillation that allows you to keep in touch with people, but to also understand that you have to remove yourself at some distance in order to be effective. If everyone is hanging on you all of the time, you can't actually be seen by everyone, right? You're trapped by 1 or 2. Vayas Yoshua kasher amar lo Moshe lilachem ba'amalek. And normally we don't need to tell in that economy of words that Eric Orbach signified in his articles, his seminal article. The Scar of Odysseus in Thank you. So I'm moving from Hebrew to English. So in that article, he talks about this economy of language. Why would you actually tell us that Yoshua did exactly as Moshe asked, if not to suggest that sometimes there's the innate fear that you have as a leader who knows you have to put yourself in danger, and someone tells you have to put yourself in danger, and then you actually do it. Then you actually do it. And then as he continues, Moshe Aaron before Alu Rosh Hagivah, again, another mention of the Givah. It's not incidental to this story. It's inherent in the worth of this story and in this leadership position that Moshe put himself. Vaya kasher Yerim Moshe. Yeah, please.
That verse before, he said he's telling Joshua what they're supposed to do. I think find it interesting is and tomorrow I'm going to go up on top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there telling them in advance.
Can you give the mic to anybody who's?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, sorry. Now, I just find it interesting that Moses is announcing also, you guys are going to do this and I'm going to do that. He's telling us what he's going to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of transparency, when you go to a doctor's office and you really appreciate when someone says, here's what I'm going to do, and here's why I'm going to do it. And they take the time to explain it, as long as they're not condescending. So this idea of Moshe explaining, but also this had to be hard for Yoshua because Moshe was saying, I am not going to fight the war with you. But I'm going to have another role. And when you think today of a lot of the tension going on as to who serves in the military, the Supreme Court decision that was ratified, that people had to extend their now another 4 months of service. So you might say, 4 months of service, what's 4 months of service if you've already served so far? But in 4 months, a life happens, right? A life happens. People make huge decisions and they spend time with their families and they fall in love and they get sick. And 4 months is a long time. So the tensions that happen when it's not so clear what everyone is doing for the war. It's different to say, here's what we will do spiritually to protect you in terms of being in touch with you and visiting your bases. If you're not fighting, let me know what you are doing. And I will say that about diaspora Jewry because it's very it's easy for us to be critical. What is everyone doing? Right? And what if they did their own IQ, Israel quotient, of how familiar they are with what's going on, how often they contact people they know and love or friends who are in Israel. When's the last time you went to Israel? When is the last time you read an Israeli novelist? You listened to Israeli music? This is a time to say, tshuva, repentance, is not only about our relationship with God, our relationship with other human beings, our relationship to self. It's also our relationship to this land. And what might we do to strengthen that relationship as the central project of the Jewish people? Now, we know the projects are complicated. There is nothing worse. If you ask any student in my university, what is the worst part of college? Group project, right? And you know who says that? The person who actually does the group project, right? This is the group project of the Jewish people. And I don't mean to be glib about it, but group projects are hard because everyone doesn't always move in the same direction. And you have to focus people on the project. In fact, Patrick Lencioni is another, he writes leadership fables. He has a book, Silos, Politics, and Turf Wars. It's worth it for the title alone. But he talks about the fact that you need to, if you want to accomplish something, you have to really focus people on a short-term project that takes everybody out of their discipline, everyone out of the silo in which they sit and say, we got to do this together. It doesn't mean that everyone is going to do it in the same way together. But how do you form a direction? So I really appreciate that point, Stuart, and that observation that there are different roles, but that the roles are clear. The roles are clear. Let's continue. והיה כאשר ירים משה ידו וגבר ישראל, וכאשר יניח ידו וגבר עמלק. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, you thought being a rabbi is hard, right? Look at the physical exertion of this, of keeping your hands up and knowing that if your hands in some way fall, that Amalek will be stronger. You think how much strength and energy do people need to go on one more hour, one more day? And I want to look at a Mishnah with you, and that would be on the next page. That's actually, that's going to be on page 2 for you. And there's some text questions. I really should have directed you to those text questions, but here they are. The Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah says, "Vaya kasher yerim Moshe yado v'gavar Yisrael v'chi yadav shel Moshe osu b'chama or shovrot b'chama." Is it possible that Moshe's hands make or break a war? אלא לומר לך, כל זמן שהיו ישראל מסתכלים כלפי מעלה, ומשעבדים את ליבם לאביהם שבשמיים, היו מתגברים. ואם לא, היו נופלים. No, it's not saying that Moshe's arms are actually in charge of the outcome of this war. It's that when Moshe holds the staff high, people will look klape shamayim, people will look heavenward and understand that that's where all victory actually comes from. So I want to do two things with you. One is to unpack this slightly as a metaphor for our current behavior. Sometimes you can see only the worst of what is happening in a situation. And then our job is to be dealers in hope, which is to say, what are the small miracles of this war? The volunteerism, the moment that a Bedouin is saved, right? A hostage retrieval. It was all the kindness of the war. How many people did a stranger's laundry during the war? So as we're reflecting, the high holidays, the Yamim Noraim, are a time to reflect on the year past. And it's so easy to focus on everything that is tragic and wrong, and not see that war also brings out the very best in people in the most kind and loving ways. That we are not, it's Elul, ani l'dodi v'dodi li. If we don't actually say there is going to be a love surge in our community right now, and it's going to be a love surge between people who really actually don't find each other lovable. We also have a presidential election coming up. Need I remind you? It is only too easy to say there's this camp and that camp, and that our job actually isn't to create love, when that, by the way, may be the only real and authentic job we ever have in this life. So thinking about this idea of klape shamayim, how do you help people actually go from the dance floor to the spiritual balcony and see something that they didn't see before? I actually want to mention a book to you. It's just coming out now in English. It's by Koren. One Day in October, Yom Echad B'October. This was published by Koren, 40 Heroes and 40 Stories. And I read this 2 hours before the keynote of Tisha B'Av, and then 2 hours after, and finished it on Tisha B'Av, and cried through a lot of it, if not most of it. And I want to read something to you from this book. It is coming out in English next week. There are 40 sermons in this book. So I just want to mention that when it was published in Hebrew, it has been reprinted multiple times. 40,000 copies have already sold in Israel. It just came out. People want and need stories of hope and stories of courage. And I want to just share one with you. The editors, they're actually, what they did is they interviewed 40 heroes from that day of October 7th, and then they strung together the stories so that there's this beautiful literary sense. Yair Agmon and Moriam Vorach. So I want to read one story to you, which is hard. And it's a Klape Shamayim story. And I read to you why the editors wrote this book, or they compiled this book. He said, the book you now hold in your hand is only a rivulet of a streaming torrent of heroism. There are many stories that we missed, heroes who wouldn't or couldn't speak. Some are still catching their breath and piecing their own stories together. We could produce another dozen volumes of incredible stories of courage from that cursed day. Perhaps we yet will. And one story, I mean, every story struck me in a different way. But I want to read you something from Yossi Landau's story. Yossi is a member of Zaka, is one of the founding members of Zaka. So for over 30 years, he was working in Zaka. He lives in Ashkelon with his children and his grandchildren. And he hears about what's going on in the South on October 7th. And he runs and he sees devastation that he describes a little bit of, but he cannot describe fully. And he's in a car and he sees a girl crying out of a car whose both of her parents were shot. And he said, of all the terrible things he's seen in 3 decades of the work, nothing prepared him for this. The girl is crying and they say, we've come to save you. And she says, are you one of us? How do I know you're one of us? And so he says, she says Shema, he says Shema, and she came out from under the seat and she looked like one of his own granddaughters. He said, I almost collapsed and broke down on the spot But I said, this isn't time. There isn't time for that. And he covered her eyes so she wouldn't see her parents and gave her to a police officer in the area. Please take care of her. Take care of her, because as long as she's here, I can't bear to keep going. And what he describes is marshaling the volunteers who came to make sure that bodies were rescued in their wholeness. We worked until 4:30 in the morning, 180 volunteers, and we managed to honor the memory of 237 holy people. But then he talks about what happened after the war, what happened to those volunteers and to himself. He said he would hear from volunteers' wives, Yossi, where's my husband? He didn't come home. And I'd start looking for them and discover them fast asleep in the car or in the synagogue. They just can't bear to go home and live their lives as normal. And he says they didn't just kill 1,200 people that day, they killed us too. And he sat on the lawn with a group of 70 volunteers. And he said, I want to share something personal. And I ask you to keep it between us so that no one will think I'm crazy. I want to tell you that I felt that day that those bodies were talking to me. I felt they were talking to me and telling me their stories. And then these volunteers interrupted him to say, we felt the same. So I want to say, when it comes to tasking, what Diaspora Jewelry has to do, the mental health services that we need to support and provide in Israel are unbelievable. And while we're not fighting on the front lines, let us fight on the front lines of that. And what I fear is that people's political stances are so sharp right now that they can't actually be in that profoundly human place of a broken heart and say, what is my responsibility to heal people? That work is going to take years, lifetimes. Where are we in that? How are our synagogues creating some kind of support network, psychological services that we might offer on Zoom for free? Marshaling the psychiatrists and psychologists in our communities, the social workers, to say, what can we provide? What does it mean? I don't know. But I think that's, that's in some way on us. And I think what Yossi Landau taught me is you have to keep going, right? This idea of klape shamayim, of saying, there's some higher calling, even though the calling is painful. And what's interesting is there's a mechilta on this that says, no, it's not that God wanted you to look klape shamayim. Moshe was holding that staff because they wanted, God wanted people to look at Moshe as a leader and say, Moshe, this is your time. And I actually am saying to you, I say this to myself every morning, this is the time. This is what all the work was for. All the training was for this moment. My husband's an ER physician. He didn't train for the person who comes in for a cold in the middle of the night, which unfortunately, because of our healthcare situation, happened. He trained for the gunshot wounds and, for the shock and trauma of the accident, for the mortality issues that come up in the ER. You think to yourself, what am I actually trained for? I had a conversation, did some work on death, and I joined the Chevra Kadisha, and I went one night, and I thought I was just going to go in sort of a journalistic capacity. And one of the women says, okay, put your boots on. I'm like, I don't need boots to write. And she said, no one sits here. There's no observation. That's not a holy thing we're all doing this together. And we all, right? It was very striking. And I spoke to a rabbi after, a good friend of mine, a conservative rabbi, and he said to me, I've never done that. And I wouldn't do the Chevra Kadisha. I said, not even once. I said, not even once. I'm afraid of death. I said, you may be in the wrong job. I was quite blunt about it. And it was a very holy moment. And one of the things that was holiest was when we were finished and the top was on the coffin, we all gathered around to apologize to the body. If we had not done, an ounce of indignity to that body, then that's on us, and we ask for forgiveness. So I want to think just about that ritual alone as a sermon of what dignity have we given the dead? And when we politicize death, we take away the dignity of those who have died. And I think that's, someone said it earlier, and Stuart, you were talking about the sort of the yurtzeit, the Kel Male, the sense of mourning and grieving. And people get distracted by that. And unfortunately, as we all know, if we work with people who are in the state of grief, when they have anger towards the person who died, they cannot grieve. Their emotional temperature, their emotional space is really driven by anger and rage and fury, and there's no compassion and empathy. There's no space for it. So creating space for compassion, such an important thing at this season. Yeah, please. Eddie, please.
Very quickly, and maybe this is just my emotion or lack thereof. I communicate with my congregation a lot, but it's usually in a regular way. My wife suggested I write a special email after what happened this Shabbat, and I said no. And the reason why I said no was I feel like, as awful as this is, these 6 poor souls, there's a lot of other hostages who have died too, even these 3 guys who were killed by the Israeli army by accident. If we start saying, oh, now we have to say something, does that dishonor the people who died before? And I don't have an answer, but I appreciate any answers you might have.
Would you appreciate a pushback? I don't think it needs to be much. I think there are people who are suffering because Hirsch Goldberg, they heard John and Rachel speak. He was the face. I was just talking to someone in who works in counseling as I was walking here from my office, and I said, we were talking about some of the differences in the Hirsch Goldberg Poland example, and I've come to call the Hirsch Goldberg's parents friends this past year, and I was in high school during the Soviet Jewry movement, and I probably wouldn't be standing in front of you had it not been for that movement, and not been for a moment when I took the Natan Sharansky poster off the wall and I took off the bracelet. And I thought, there is nothing the Jewish people can't do. And I wrote in EJP yesterday a letter to John and Rachel, and there said, our American optimism has really blinded us from Middle East terrorism, the brutality of it, the savagery of it. And we sort of think the hopefulness that died when Hirsch died is something of a magnitude of difference for many people who found, especially people who don't speak Hebrew, who didn't connect to other stories. I will say that making yourself available regularly for people, theologically, we could have a conversation, because one death isn't different than 6 million deaths, but it is different for us. The enormity of it, or the severity of it, or the cruelty or barbarity of it is different. And just to say, as I did WhatsApp in a number of our student leadership chats, I'm checking in if anyone would like to speak individually or as a group. And I have to say, no one took me up on the offer, but they needed to have the offer. And if they don't hear that from their rabbi, there is nowhere they're going unless they're in therapy to talk about this. So that's my pushback. But I understand theologically and philosophically where you're coming from. Yeah.
I will use.
You have to stand up here.
Up front. I know now no one's going to want to ask a question.
I failed the test of the BF Skinner test about how to get to the front, so I don't get my little. I was just going to point out, for me, going to Columbus Circle on Sunday was very personal, and writing about it was very personal, in a way, because in a community in North Hempstead of Long Island, we're adjacent to Joel's congregation, and Joel has been a incredible supporter and guide, bringing love to the Nutras in a way that's just been inspiring. Really, it has, Joel. And to know that the Nutras were going to be there, another family who has a son who is still alive, God willing, right? To be there just to support them and to be at their side, to know that, for them to know that because of this horror that happened last week, that could have easily been their son, that we're there with them. I think it's so vital and important. but he's the one who's doing the most work.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for doing the work. And thank you for bringing it to our attention. Maybe it's the writer in me. I know I also give two sermons on Yom Kippur, and I know that the way we go over every word and where we think it's going to hit emotionally, and like, is this right? Is that right? Is it off? Or is it, I think we give words to suffering when we name it for ourselves and just say, even if it's I just want to describe what I'm going through, and even analyzing, I haven't reached out to you because I've been sort of struggling with my own feelings about this, and the fact that on some level it's not different, and then in many ways it really is different. I think that kind of emotional transparency and honesty is what people want to hear right now, and giving people language is a is a service. I want to go back to our text. I just want to do a little bit more of it with you, and any questions that you have or insights in particular. So we're in the war. Videi Moshe kvedim v'yikchu even v'yisimu taftav v'yeshev aleh. So there comes a point where this is just too hard. And what's interesting is physically, Moshe doesn't put his hands down, which is what you expect. They sort of seat him on a rock as if they had an observation. God didn't tell us your feet couldn't sit down. Can we take the load off in some way? We can't take all the load off. Can we take the load off in some way? You, by the way, as a spiritual supporter and counselor to your congregation, might say, I need someone to take the load off. And who is that someone? I was working closely with a colleague, professional colleague of mine in the Jewish nonprofit world. And during COVID, she said to me, it was as if I just lay in bed for the first few days. And I just didn't know. I had no idea what to do. I had no idea I was going to make payroll. Our work only involves people in their physical presence. I just had nothing. And sometimes you might say, I actually need help. And if you need to go to a trustee and say, I need therapy, or I need coaching, or I need an assistant, or I need, is the idea of saying, who's your rock? And everybody needs to identify the rock. Moshe needs a rock. Please. Yeah. Right. They see it. Yeah. So beautiful. Yeah. Correct. Correct. And by the way, to that point, which is so profound, later on in Bamidbar Kaf in 20, when Miriam dies and they complain about the water, and they don't see Aaron, and they don't see Moshe, and they don't see the grief, right? And we all know that, because I imagine many of us have been through our own difficult losses, and there were other people they just couldn't get beyond. This is what I need right now. What have you done for me lately? And you're thinking, am I invisible to you? Can you see me? So I think there's something of that in here. They see him. When I looked at this text, the word emunah, it was like a pop of color. It's not that I haven't read this text. It's not that it's not read every year. It's that all of a sudden you say, what was Moshe? Moshe was the arms of faith. He was the arms of faith. Those arms got a workout. Those arms were strong. And Moshe didn't do it alone. If you're saying, I'm doing too much of this alone, who can help me? Who are the Yidei Emunah who will also hold up the burden with me? And many of us grow up in leadership. We're not good delegators. I'm putting my hand up. Think, oh, let me just do this myself. It'll be easier. I'll just get it done, right? You know who you are. Some of you are nodding, and some of you will nod later. But you know how it is. You went into this and you think, I'm gonna do this myself. But now we are in the 11th month of doing it ourselves. How's it going? Maybe not so well. And maybe what we need is what kind of support do I need to give myself in the next month so that I am ready to lead and serve during the Chagim. Does this mean taking a day off and walking on the beach by myself? I don't know what it involves, but take that time because it's real. It's real, and we need it. Now here, this is almost incidental to the story. The actual work that you needed to do with the sword, okay, whatever we needed to do in war got done. The cherev The other symbol that's kind of like a staff, but really not a staff. The other thing, that instrument of violence, as opposed to that instrument of compassion, was used, but it's incidental to this story. Vayomer Hashem Moshe, Katov zot zikaron b'sefer v'sim b'oznei Yehoshua ki moche emche et zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim. Vivem Moshe mizbeach v'yikra shmo Hashem nisi v'yomer ki yad al kes yad milchama Hashem b'Amalek midur dor. This, to me, this was gobsmacking when I read it for the first time. I said, wait a minute. Did God ever say to Moshe during Egypt, write all of it down? So it was like, must be. So I'm going through those first 16 chapters. I'm looking, I'm going, God never says, write this down. So why doesn't God say, write this down? This is the moment. This is the moment of Exodus. We're going to tell this story again and again. It would have been really helpful had you written it down. And then it dawned on me why this in particular had to be written down. Evil needs to be described in its brutality, because when you are feeling good about the world, you cannot believe it ever happened. How could there be Holocaust deniers? This is the most documented event in the history of humankind, and still people don't believe because they don't want to believe. They don't believe in Jewish goodness. We sometimes don't believe in hate. And I struggle with this. How is it that there are people who cannot name Hamas as a terrorist organization? How is that? How is that we really have given every justification as freedom fighters and not actually named the rape that has taken place? How is it? Write it all down, because people don't believe you now. They don't believe it while it's happening. I remember on October 8th, right? It was Simchat Torah. And we had guests, and I said, look, the world will finally understand what terrorism is. And he turned to me, he's in politics himself. He turned to me and he said, Erica, that's today. Tomorrow it's going to be different. And I thought, in my naive, optimistic, hopeful self, I said, no. How could you deny this? How could you diminish this? And one of the things we need to do as holders of the spiritual framing for this is actually naming the evil and telling people we are writing this down, because even when we write it down, people will not believe it. What did Moshe call this place? So if you look biblically, we often name a place after something that immediately happened or something that occurred during the course of a war or an event. And actually, what Moshe says here is Nisim. I want to name this place the place of miracles, because Moshe understood, maybe not that he doubted God, but maybe he doubted himself. I don't think I have what it takes to help people through this. And so he builds a mizbeach, which is really the Jewish response to war, is to build an altar afterwards and to give thanks and to actually say, my job is to note the miracles. All the politicians and all the journalists will note everything else, you can be sure, and they will skewer everything else. But our job is actually to say, what's the mizbeach I can build in the moment, the altar that I can build in this sacred space with my congregation, so that they can see the miracles. You know, I just read you a painful story, but there's so many miracles that's in that story too. The miracles of human affection and human compassion and human service. So that's a text. Thank you for learning it with me. Thank you for thinking it through with me. Please don't hesitate to email me ways that you may use or not use this text, or some piece of the text, or some image of the symbol or the painting. I have been searching, and that's a lot of my book, was just sort of searching for texts that gave me a perspective. So thank you for all the work that you're going to do in the next month and a half to create perspective and to hold the symbolic weight, and it is heavy, of our people. Thank you. I think we have a few more minutes. a few more minutes if you have questions or observations or insights. Ashin?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Say hi to everyone.
Hi everyone in Zoom land. That in some ways this was a failure. First of all, it says via chalosh, Yoshua only weakens him. There are midrashim that say Moshe, his hands were weak because he didn't go and fight. He doesn't go and fight. And compared to the amazing victory of Egypt of destroying them, this is, we have anti-Semitism now. And so I just wonder, there are these elements. Mahar bothers me a lot. Like, why do you say tomorrow? Like now. So I don't know what to do with all that, but there's this element that it wasn't such a huge success, and that Moshe was weak, and why were Moshe, who could do everything, suddenly his hands are weak. So I don't know.
Okay, I think that's it's fair in the text and also afterwards, and different interpretations of the text. That's why there's Shivim Panim, 70 faces. I actually think that the word machar is extremely significant and very important, because I think what Moshe is saying is, in every war there is the yom of war, the day of war, and there is the machar, the after, the morning after. Whose job is it going to be bo bayom, on the day? And Moshe understands that there's going to be a job after. And I think that's what I was, trying to communicate in terms of what it means to be a rabbi, an educator, a spiritual guide in the moment, is we're not on that front line, but we are the machar people. And what does that machar, how does that machar obligate us? And that's sort of a focus. Any other? It's Paul.
Similar to that, a couple that I think owns a nursery on one of the kibbutzim that was evacuated, and they spent all this time worrying that their nursery, and people all over the south of Israel bought their plants and flowers from this nursery, that they lost their business because they were evacuated, they couldn't go back. And when they were allowed to go back, they found a note from Israeli soldiers who said, "We know you couldn't be here. We watered your plants for you." And I thought that was a beautiful story yesterday. I want to tell you, this is very meaningful. I think I'm going to end my sermon probably on the first day with this story. And using the idea of looking up, I think I'm going to ask everyone to rise and sing Esa Enai with me, which I think is a perfect um, pairing with the text.
I read that story many months ago when it happened, and just listening to you tell it, even though I knew exactly where you were going, I really felt verklempt. That sort of the growth that comes after. By the way, on Tisha B'av, for the 3 weeks leading up, the 3 weeks or the 9 days, I should say, leading up to Tisha B'av, you're not allowed to plant. You're not allowed to plant. Right? So planting is a sign of happiness, right? So even the planting that we have to do when we're finished. I will say one of the questions I've often asked after I teach this text to lay people is, or actually ask them on the moment, who is your rock? Write it down. Like who right now, who is your rock? And also again, that box, right? Who stands to the left of you, the right of you, who's above you? And above you may be people who you think are in Shemayim, right? It was the people who have died. I always say this when you have your site, you have those lights on the, I always say when we pray in the pews and we pray on the walls. And that is our entire congregation. Our congregation are also the people who inspired us to pray and prayed before us. So this sense of who's your rock, who supports you to your left, to your right, above you, physically, spiritually. I think helping people, actually giving them a pause to name those people. And I've actually heard some incredible things where someone would cry and just say, you know, I didn't think about it to this minute, but the person who always gives me hope is, and they might name a person who passed away, and they go to the cemetery and they ask advice from. It's like, I've heard some amazing answers. It's such a simple question and also so profound. And then how do you acknowledge the support that they've given you? What does it mean to write a note, reach out to that person to thank them in this moment? So that's been also, I think, a little hashlacha, a little consequence of teaching this is paying attention to what people paid attention to as they were learning the text. And with that, I don't want to stand between rabbis and food. Thank you so much. Wishing you a Shana Tova, B'sorot Tovot for all of us and for Am Yisrael.